Blood Meridian by Cormack McCarthy. Your ideas are terrifying, and your hearts are faint. Your acts of pity and cruelty are absurd, committed with no calm, as if they were irresistible. Finally, you fear blood more and more. Blood and time. Paul Valéry. It is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost as if in sorrowing. There is no sorrowing, for sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. Jacob Boehme. Clark, who led last year's expedition to the Afar region of northern Ethiopia, and UC Berkeley colleague Tim D. White, also said that a re-examination of a 300,000-year-old fossil skull found in the same region earlier showed evidence of having been scalped. The Yuma Daily Sun, June 13th, 1982. One. See the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark-turned fields with rags of snow, and darker woods beyond that harbor, yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids, they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother, dead these 14 years, did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name. The child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. At 14 he runs away. He will not see again the freezing kitchen house in the pre-dawn dark, the firewood, the washpots. He wanders west as far as Memphis, a solitary migrant upon that flat and pastoral landscape. Blacks in the fields, lank and stooped, their fingers spider-like among the bolls of cotton. A shadowed agony in the garden, against the sun's declining figures moving in the slower dusk across a paper skyline. A lone dark husbandman pursuing mule and harrow down the rain-blown bottom land toward night. A year later he is in St. Louis. He is taken on for New Orleans aboard a flatboat. 42 days on the river. At night the steamboats hoot and trudge past through the black waters, all alight like cities adrift. They break up the float and sell the lumber. And he walks in the streets and hears tongues he has not heard before. He lives in a room above a courtyard behind a tavern, and he comes down at night like some fairy book beast to fight with the sailors. He is not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are set close. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives. All races, all breeds, men whose speech sounds like the grunting of apes, men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie bleeding in the mud, he feels mankind itself vindicated. On a certain night, a Maltese boatswain shoots him in the back with a small pistol. Swinging to deal with the man, he is shot again, just below the heart. The man flees, and he leans against the bar with the blood running out of his shirt. The others look away. After a while, he sits on the floor. He lies in a cot in the room upstairs for 2 weeks while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings his meals. She carries out his slops. A hard-looking woman with a wiry body like a man's. By the time he is mended, he has no money to pay her, and he leaves in the night and sleeps on the riverbank until he can find a boat that will take him on. The boat is going to Texas. Only now is the child finally divested of all that he has been. His origins are become remote, as is his destiny, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrains so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. The passengers are a different lot, diffident. They cage their eyes, and no man asks another what it is that brings him here. He sleeps on the deck, a pilgrim among others. He watches the dim shore rise and fall, gray seabirds gawking, flights of pelicans coastwise above the gray swells. They disembark aboard a lighter, settlers with their chattels, all studying the low coastline, the thin bite of sand and scrub pine swimming in the haze. He walks through the narrow streets of the port. The air smells of salt and new-sawn lumber. At night, whores call to him from the dark, like souls in want. A week, and he is on the move again, a few dollars in his purse that he's earned, walking the sand roads of the southern night alone, his hands balled in the cotton pockets of his cheap coat. Earthen causeways across the marshland, egrets in their rookeries, white as candles among the moss. The wind has a raw edge to it, and leaves lope by the roadside and skelter on in the night fields. He moves north through the small settlements and farms, working for day wages and found. He sees a parricide hanged in a crossroads hamlet, and the man's friends run forward and pull his legs, and he hangs dead from his rope while urine darkens his trousers. He works in a sawmill. He works in a diphtheria pest house. He takes as pay from a farmer an aged mule and aback this animal in the spring of the year 1849. He rides up through the latter-day Republic of Fredonia into the town of Nacogdoches. The Reverend Green had been playing to a full house daily, as long as the rain had been falling, and the rain had been falling 2 weeks. When the kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent, there was standing room among the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of the wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth into the downpour now and again for fresh air before the rain drove them in again. He stood with the others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him in that crowd was that he was not armed. "Neighbors," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of these here hell holes right here in Nacogdoches." I said to him, "You going to take the Son of God in there with you?" And he said, "Oh, no, I ain't." And I said, "Don't you know that he said, I will follow ye always, even unto the end of the road?" "Well," he said, "I ain't asking nobody to go nowheres." And I said, "Neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's a-going to be there with you, every step of the way, whether you ask it or you don't." I said, "Neighbor, you can't get shed of him. Now, are you going to drag him, into that hell hole yonder? You ever see such a place for rain?" The kid had been watching the Reverend. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches after the fashion of teamsters, and he wore a wide brim hat with a low, round crown. He was slightly wall-eyed, and he was watching the kid earnestly, as if he'd known his opinion about the rain. "I just got here," said the kid. "Well, it beats all I ever seen." The kid nodded. An enormous man, dressed in an oilcloth slicker, had entered the tent and removed his hat. He was bald as a stone, and he had no trace of beard, and he had no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them. He was close on 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar, even in this nomadic house of God, and he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase the rain from it, for now he put it on again. The Reverend had stopped his sermon altogether. There was no sound in the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted the hat and then pushed his way forward as far as the crate-board pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it my duty to inform you that the man holding this revival is an impostor. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution recognized or improvised. He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and has only committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending to his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the piety he despises. In truth, the gentleman standing here before you, posing as a minister of the Lord, is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas." "Oh, God," cried the Reverend. "Lies, lies." He began reading feverishly from his opened Bible. On a variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years, I said 11, who had come to him in trust and whom he was surprised in the act of violating, while actually clothed in the livery of his God. A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. "This is him," cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him, the devil. Here he stands." "Let's hang the turd," called an ugly thug from the gallery to the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, for having congress with a goat. "Yes, lady, that is what I said." goat. Why, damn my eyes if I won't shoot the son of a bitch, said a man, rising at the far side of the tent, and drawing a pistol from his boot, he leveled it and fired. The young teamster instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseamed the tent and stepped outside into the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud toward the hotel. Already gunfire was general within the tent, and a dozen exits had been hacked through the canvas walls, and people were pouring out, women screaming, folk stumbling, folk trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch. As they did so, the tent began to sway and buckle, and like a huge and wounded Medusa, it slowly settled to the ground, trailing tattered canvas walls and ratty guy ropes over the ground. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "He's here is on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to. You couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that tall. Not every man could even get his elbows up on it. But it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly, as if about to give another address. By now men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. "Judge, how did you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods?" said the judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? When did you know him?" "To know all that stuff on him." "You mean the Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir. I reckon you was in Fort Smith 'fore you come out here." "I was never in Fort Smith in my life." "Doubt that he was." They looked from one to the other. "Or was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on the man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally, someone began to laugh, then another. Soon, they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. It had been raining for 16 days when he met Toadvine, and it was raining yet. He was still standing in the same saloon, and he had drunk up all his money save $2. The teamster had gone. The room was all but empty. The door stood open, and you could see the rain falling in the empty lot behind the hotel. He drained his glass and went out. There were boards laid across the mud, and he followed the paling band of door light down toward the bat-board jakes at the bottom of the lot. Another man was coming up from the jakes, and they met halfway on the narrow planks. The man before him swayed slightly. His wet hat brim fell to his shoulders, save in the front, where it was pinned back. He held a bottle loosely in one hand. "You better get out of my way," he said. The kid wasn't going to do that, and he saw no use in discussing it. He kicked the man in the jaw. The man went down and got up again. He said, "I'm gonna kill you." He swung with the bottle, and the kid ducked, and he swung again, and the kid stepped back. When the kid hit him, the man shattered the bottle against the side of his head. He went off the boards into the mud, and the man lunged after him with the jagged bottleneck and tried to stick it in his eye. The kid was fending with his hands, and they were slick with blood. He kept trying to reach into his boot for his knife. "Kill your ass," the man said. They slogged about in the dark of the lot, coming out of their boots. The kid had his knife now, and then sat down on the planks and pulled on the boots, mud and all. Then he rose and slogged off through the lot to pick something up. "I want you to look here," he said, "at my goddamned hat." You couldn't tell what it was. Something dead. He flapped it about and pulled it over his head and went on, and the kid followed. The dram house was a long, narrow hall, wainscoted with varnished boards. There were tables by the wall and spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The barman looked up when they entered, and a nigger that had been sweeping the floor stood the broom against the wall and went out. "Where's Sidney?" said the man in his suit of mud. "In the bed, I reckon." They went on. "Toadvine," called the barman. The kid looked back. The barman had come from behind the bar and was looking after them. They crossed from the door through the lobby of the hotel toward the stairs, leaving varied forms of mud behind them on the floor. As they started up the stairs, the clerk at the desk leaned and called to them, "Toadvine." He stopped and looked back. "He'll shoot you. Old Sidney?" Old Sidney. They went up the stairs. At the top of the landing was a long hall, with a window light at the end. There were varnished doors down the walls, set so close they might have been closets. Toadvine went on until he came to the end of the hall. He listened at the last door, and he eyed the kid. "You got a match?" The kid searched his pockets and came up with a crushed and stained wooden box. The man took it from him. "Need a little tinder here," he said. He was crumbling the box and stacking the bits against the door. He struck a match and set the pieces alight. He pushed the little pile of burning wood under the door and added more matches. "Is he in there?" said the boy. "That's what we're fixin' to see." A dark curl of smoke rose, a blue flame of burning varnish. They squatted in the hallway and watched. Thin flames began to run up over the panels and dart back again. The watchers looked like forms excavated from a bog. "Tap on the door now," said Toadvine. The kid rose. Toadvine stood up and waited. They could hear the flames crackling inside the room. The kid tapped. "You better tap louder than that. The man drinks some." He balled his fist and lambasted the door about 5 times. "Hellfire," said a voice. "Here he comes." They waited. "You hot son of a bitch," said the voice. Then the knob turned and the door opened. He stood in his underwear, holding in one hand the towel he'd used to turn the doorknob with. When he saw them, he turned and started back into the room, but Toadvine seized him about the neck and rode him to the floor, and held him by the hair, and began to pry out an eyeball with his thumb. The man grabbed his wrist and bit it. "Kick his mouth in," called Toadvine. "Kick it." The kid stepped past them into the room and turned the kicked man in the face. Toadvine held his head back by the hair. "Kick him," he called. "I'll kick him, honey." He kicked. Toadvine pulled the bloody head around and looked at it and let it flop to the floor. And he rose and kicked the man himself. 2 spectators were standing in the hallway. The door was completely afire, and part of the wall and ceiling. They went out and down the hall. The clerk was coming up the steps 2 at a time. "Toadvine, you son of a bitch," he said. Toadvine was 4 steps above him, and when he kicked him, he caught him in the throat. The clerk sat down on the stairs. When the kid came past, he hit him in the side of the head, and the clerk slumped over and began to slide toward the landing. The kid stepped over him and went down the lobby and crossed to the front door and out. Toadvine was running down the street, waving his fists above his head, crazily and laughing. He looked like a great clay voodoo doll, made animate, and the kid looked like another. Behind them, flames were licking at the top corner of the hotel, and clouds of dark smoke rose into the warm Texas morning. He'd left the mule with a Mexican family that boarded animals at the edge of town, and he arrived there, wild-looking and out of breath. The woman opened the door and looked at him. "Need to get my mule," he wheezed. She looked at him some more, then she called towards the back of the house. He walked around. There were horses tethered in the lot, and there was a flatbed wagon against the fence with some turkeys sitting on the edge looking out. The old lady had come to the back door. "Nito," she called. "Venga. Hay un caballero aquí, venga." He went down the shed to the tack room and got his wretched saddle and his blanket roll and brought them back. He found the mule and unstalled it and bridled it with the rawhide hackamore and led it to the fence. He leaned against the animal with his shoulder and got the saddle over it and got it clinched, the mule starting and shying and running its head along the fence. He led it across the lot. The mule kept shaking its head sideways as if it had something in its ear. He led it out of the road. As he paused, the house, as he passed, the woman came padding out after him. When she saw him put his foot in the stirrup, she began to run. He swung up into the broken saddle and chucked the mule forward. She stopped at the gate and watched him go. He didn't look back. When he passed back through the town, the hotel was burning, and men were standing around watching it, some holding empty buckets. A few men sat horseback watching the flames, and one of these was the judge. As the kid rode past, the judge turned and watched him. He turned the horse, as if he'd have the animal watched too. When the kid looked back, the judge smiled. The kid touched up the mule, and they went sucking out past the old stone fort along the road west.